You're listening to the AI Moment with me, Jonathan Wagstaff.
And me, Danny Denhard.
And Dan, what are we going to talk about today?
We're going to dive into the topic, which is Europe losing the AI battle, or has it lost it already? So, shall I set it up, Jonathan?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, everyone knows the large players, the LLMs. So that's Claude, the Anthropics. It's ChatGPT from OpenAI, and then it's Google with Gemini. But what a lot of people are sort of missing a little bit is what's happening with the layers underneath that. And that's powering huge potential in Europe. And we've actually got some really well-known ones in the UK. So we have DeepMind in the UK, which Google bought a few years ago. It's been instrumental in modernizing AI, and it's deeply, deeply integrated into Google Gemini since its acquisition. 11 Labs, which is, we've mentioned it quite a few times, which has gone all in on voice AI and is really powering a lot of anything that's voice is really being powered by 11 Labs. France has Mistral, which is a high-performance LLM, and then Stability AI, which is sort of an open AI multi-molded generative model. So they work in images, videos, and audio. So with all of that said, Jonathan, what's your take, and where do you think Europe's play is, or where do you think we're really at?
I'd agree with you, Dan. I think it's like a number of other fields over the last 50 years. Europe is producing world-class academic research, world-class AI talent, financial research, and things like DeepMind. Some of the other examples you gave are absolutely clearly part of that. What we still have in Europe, which the US doesn't have, is we don't have this infrastructure that allows businesses to scale quickly. And so the ambition for many European businesses to be acquired, to get to a certain point and be acquired, the US access to capital and their infrastructure for scaling platforms means that those big players, as you said, the Anthropic Claudes and the ChatGPTs are all American. We're seeing Chinese players like DeepSeek go into the market as well, but there's not really a big European LLM player like that. And maybe some of that is to do with the infrastructure and the finance access to capital and things like that. But the problem for Europe is that I think we've got some really great talent. We've got some really great ideas. We have AI skills as good as anybody, but it's that transition from a kind of lab to a startup to a global market that we don't seem to do as well. That's not to say Europe's story is over, but in the LLM space, we are, I think, a little bit behind the curve.
If we were to break down Europe in a really simple way for people to understand the sort of AI in Europe, Paris is basically a foundational model hub, which is like a large scale foundation models. So they've with Mistral, it was at one point a shining beacon for AI. They've also got a number of different other sort of fairly well known in AI, but maybe not so much to non-AI build people, but Poolside, and there's another couple which have been great. But they've been propelled by sovereign investment, so from the government and that. And then London basically is the dominant hub outside of Silicon Valley, really. It specializes in applications, research, and autonomous mobility. So there are companies out of London and Oxford that are basically, one's called Wave, which really dives into autonomous and AV vehicles. And then there are Munich and Stockholm, which are like industrial and legal hubs, which have really considered around infrastructure, industrial, and defense. So defense AI will be a whole new podcast in itself. But I think it's really important that people understand the sort of landscape and that what we're doing from a hub perspective and how the investments are coming, because that really does shine a light on how we're tackling it away from some of the other large nations. So one thing that you brought up when we were chatting is the China versus the US versus Europe versus everyone else. Should we dive into that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one area to platform that, Dan, is power access is one of the things. I was listening to Scott Galloway present about a month ago, and he was talking about power and the way that the Chinese have really got their power game together so that they are already preparing for the kind of power they're going to need by 2030 to power all the AI models. The US not so clever, and I suspect Europe not so clever either. So besides access to capital and some of the other constraints, I agree with you. I think there's some awesome things going on in Europe and small experiments, small hubs. But I wonder whether there is a Europe-wide power strategy that's going to be enough to do what we need to do if we're going to really compete. But what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I also sort of read a number of different people's opinions. Scott Galloway was kind of the first one to really talk it through. But from a UK perspective, being like selfish, when there's a big football match on or a big tournament on, we have to borrow power from France.
Yeah.
So all the kettles that are boiled and stuff like that. If we were to go hard and heavy into it, we'd probably have to do it offshore, or we'd really have to overly invest in the critical infrastructure. And I don't know in the current state of the market whether we could do that. Also, what you said around China, that I know they're accelerating hard and heavy into that. So Alibaba with their Quan model have I think they're building at such a rate and from data centers and power perspective that they're what seems light years ahead of us. And I Silicon Valley are trying to do that, and the size of these power things are incredible. Apparently one in Texas is so big, when you fly over it, you think it's a dedicated city. It just shows the scale of it.
Well, part of that is to do, I mean, outside of nuclear, a lot of the things like solar farms and wind farms, they require land. And obviously, America has land in abundance in a way that the European individual countries don't. And I also think because of that, there's also resistance to things like wind farms in Europe because they're seen as an eyesore. And, there's some work done with offshore, but there's a lot more hurdles to climb over, it seems to me, from that country. Where I do think there could be a big win for European companies is if you start to verticalize. They built on the point that you made a few minutes ago, Dan, but I can see like industrial solutions or healthcare solutions or climate solutions. So rather than competing in the big LLM space, and it may be that the world moves from, okay, the LLMs have their day, and then actually we get more interested in these kind of AI-enabled businesses or AI-enabled sectors where it's more industrial AI, if you like, and AI is used in an industrial way. That could be somewhere where Europe finds its niche, in the same way that we have a niche for things like racing cars. Although there's car manufacturing all over the world, mass manufacturing now in places like Asia, not so much in UK, a little bit in Germany, but what we're still very good at are the specific niche. Just about all the clever stuff with Formula One is still done in Europe. So that may be where we go with some of this stuff.
Something we flirted with a little bit on the Agentic pod with Jeff a couple of episodes ago. We were saying around how the large LLMs, what a lot of CTOs and from big companies and foundations are suggesting it's going to become far more smaller and localized and geo-specific. So I wonder when we get down to, say, 6 months' time, how that might also play out and how these smaller variations that go off and become very specific and specialized really do take away some of the emphasis of these really large language models and become more and more important in the local areas or, in the geos that want to adopt them or industries that want to adopt those more specifically.
I think so. I think we've seen it already with Waymo. There's a small language model that's doing a vertical industrial application. You could easily see that in a manufacturing plant, right? You could see a small language model that's running all the tools in a manufacturing plant and it's responding to various inputs and stuff. I think that's a very plausible route forward for lots of sectors.
What's your sort of advice for leaders and company owners? What advice should we give?
I think it's an area to say, I wouldn't write Europe off. Although there's not a big European large language model, I think there's a lot of good stuff happening around AI in Europe. I think there are bigger questions than we can answer or the businesses can answer around the way that Europe supports entrepreneurship and access to capital and things that we can't really answer here. But I would say there are some very interesting things happening in European AI as there are worldwide. It's all moving very, very quickly. And I would encourage anybody to keep an eye on their own sector. So whatever sector your business is in, just keep an eye on the things that are happening in your sector, the development of your sector, because there are some remarkable little gems happening in different sectors around there. How about you, Dan? What's your TLDR for people?
My TLDR is don't overthink around the location of the model just yet or the applications. If you have the money or you're looking for money to build out your own infrastructure or AI, there's huge amounts of money that are coming in from local governments, from international powerhouses. So, still a lot of the investment still comes from Silicon Valley. If you want to become a, verticalization product and you want to build it bigger and for the whole industry, there's still a lot of money there. And also think about it for there's sort of short term, mid term, and long term. Short term is get your company up and running, get it protected, get it into a place where you can survive to thrive. And then mid term, you can start thinking about how do you either localize or build out your vertical specialism within AI. And the long term is how do you help co-create the ecosystem where people can really sort of leverage your power and your expertise, your own unique data set to really set you up, because almost every company is becoming an AI company with AI. They just don't realize it. So there's huge potentials and huge opportunity there for anyone in any country. As long as you're thinking about the future, you've always got a chance to win.
And that whole pace is accelerating, right? The opportunities are coming thick and fast. Good to see you, my friend, and I will see you next time.
See you next time. Thanks for listening today, everyone. If you liked what you heard, please give us a rating and review in any of the podcast players. We have a supporting newsletter, which is aimoment.co.uk, that comes out on Mondays and Fridays with every pod, and we dive a little bit deeper. So please subscribe there. Have a great week, and we'll see you soon.